Y'all know Bob. Bob has been leading the Firewise push here in this community for a long time. I'm Ron McWilliams. I'm fairly new. I moved here in August, joined the fire department, and Bob and I went to San Antonio recently and took a couple courses there. And honestly, being new to this community, it was very eye-opening to me. I know some of it can be a little redundant, and sometimes you can sit around and think, oh, well, it's not going to happen to us. You know, when I went to this class, it was interesting, because they weren't ever saying, like, if a fire comes through Ransom Canyon, or if your house gets threatened. It was always when. I mean, to them, and there were major municipalities that are investing millions and millions of dollars into this, and it was just always when. So I care too much about my neighbors and my friends that I've already met here to, you know, kind of just sit by and do nothing. So this is a couple presentations that we put together today. Mylea has a nice one about fire brands, and she's going to go into what that is. Embers, you know, as we see them flying through the air ahead of fires, that's something that really is leading the charge now, and the one thing we really have to prep ourselves for, because guys, to be honest, you know, a fire can be 2 miles away and all of a sudden your neighbor's house is burning, and you're going, what? That fire's way over there. So Mylea's going to hit on that some more. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mylea.
Good morning. Ron, will you turn these lights off?
Yes, ma'am. Let me see if I can figure that out.
So I'm going to talk to you all this morning, like Ron said, about embers, which is pretty much an interchangeable word for fire brands. So if you hear fire brands, you hear embers, think basically the same thing. It's just what you think of when you burn trash in your yard and you see the little bits of fire sparking out of your fire, and it just floats off in the wind, but you can still see it kind of burning. That's what we're talking about. And Ron has got a really great video for later this morning that will show you exactly what that looks like when embers are just washing down on the house.
Good morning, sir.
So there are 3 topics that I'm going to cover this morning. The first one is understanding wildfire. This is one of my base topics. I almost always cover this topic every presentation because I feel like it's a good idea to bring things back to the basic and understand about wildfire as a process. And then we're going to talk about how fire spreads. In particular, we're going to talk about embers or fire brands. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is home ignition zones, which I'm sure y'all all heard about home ignition zones or defensible space, terms like that. We're going to hit on that very briefly. I know that I've talked to y'all about that. I think the past couple of years we've talked about it, but again, it's one of those things that I feel like, it's a very basic thing that we all need to understand, and it's always good to get a refresher.
We won't be successful being Firewise if we don't understand HIVs.
Correct. So the first thing that I want to make clear and make sure that we all understand is that fire is an essential and natural process for the entire state. And when we talk about fire and fire ecology, one of the major topics that we like to talk about is fire regime. So how often would an area naturally burn if we didn't suppress fires? And for the Plains region, that's every 1 to 5 years. So if you see an area that's been burned, that means that it could very easily burn again next year. I know one particular ranch in the northern panhandle that it burned in December, and then it burned again in March, and then it burned again the following December. And that's perfectly natural for this ecosystem. That's what maintains a grassland, and that's what keeps the brush and the trees from encroaching on a grassland. That's a huge part of that cycle. It replenishes soil nutrients, it removes dead and dying vegetation, so you think about all that old dead grass, it removes that. It exposes the soil to sunlight. I mean, there's books written about all of the things that happen when you burn off old grass and how you get more nutrients in the soil, you change how water gets into the soil, you change how the temperature raises in the soil when sunlight hits it, you change so many things about it. And that's the amazing thing about ecology is there's so much that we know about it and we know very little. So what we've come up with, though, or not we, because I'm not a fire ecologist, but what fire ecologists have come up with is an understanding that under conditions where wildfires or prescribed fires are used properly, it can create conditions for healthy regrowth. which is good for wildlife, it's good for your vegetation, it's good for grazing. There are a lot of things that it can benefit. One of society's influences over the past 100 years or so, probably less than 100, probably looking more like 80, but we'll call it about 100 years, is that we've created this history of fire prevention and suppression. And what that means is, whereas farmers maybe used to burn off their fields, or ranchers maybe used to burn their pastures, or folks in East Texas maybe used to burn their piney woods to get rid of undergrowth, they stopped doing that, which sounds like, yay, we have less fires, right? Well, the problem with not having controlled fires, or the problem with not allowing wildfires to burn wilderness areas, is that what happens to all of that growth that would have been removed? It continues to grow, it dies, it builds up. And then when you do have a fire come through there, it's not stoppable. So some of y'all in this room probably remember really well, I think it was maybe 1985 or 1986, Yellowstone caught on fire. Huge fire. I obviously wasn't here, but I think it was maybe 3. But I've read stories that you could actually see the smoke plume in Yellowstone from Amarillo.
Wow.
That's an enormous fire. Well, how did that happen? That happened because the National Park Service made it a priority to put out every single fire that started in Yellowstone. And so when you finally did have a fire, it's this enormous growth. What would have happened if it had burned every 10 years or so like it's supposed to? You would have had a little ground fire, maybe some trees would have burned, and it would have been fine. And so because of the way we have managed some of our land, that set us up for some worse wildfires. You add into that, just as it has always for millennia, the climate is changing. We go through oscillations of ups and downs. Because we are in one of those oscillations, and that's sometimes difficult to understand, we don't know all of the ways that's going to affect vegetation and how it grows and how that affects our wildfires, which means that we have to be extra vigilant about how we are going to handle the vegetation on our properties. So, I think the most important thing is to understand how fire burns. It's important to understand why it burns and what influences the way that it burns. There are 3 things. Fire folks really love triangles, and they love having 3 things. And so there are 3 things that we're going to talk about here. And this particular triangle is weather, terrain, and fuels. And those are the major drivers of fire behavior. And what I mean by that is, how hot does the fire burn? How fast does the fire move? Those are the main things that we're looking at here. You have a really, really hot fire, and you're probably not going to get those benefits that we talked about earlier unless you're specifically trying to destroy something. So, for instance, you have an invasive species and you want to go out and do a destroy burn on it, then you want a really hot fire. If you're trying to get some of those other benefits where you don't really want to kill all your vegetation, you just want to remove the dead stuff, you don't want a really hot fire. So these are some things that influence that. Why is that important to you as a homeowner? You don't want a really hot fire coming at your house. You want a really nice, cool, calm fire coming at your house. Because a firefighter can fight a nice, low, slow-burning fire that's not burning intensely at a fast rate, right? So, of these 3 things, we've got weather, terrain, and fuels. Who here knows how to control the weather? Terrain, who here knows how to change the terrain of the canyon?
Alan Butler.
So of these 3 things, there are 0 things we can do about weather, there are 0 things that we can do about terrain. What about fuels? Fuels being your vegetation and the way that your home is built. Those things we can influence, and so those are the things that we need to focus on. It's important to understand weather and terrain and how they influence fire behavior, but we don't want to focus on those because there's not a whole lot that we can do about those 2 things. So weather, The main things that will influence fire behavior are how dry is it, how hot is it, and how windy is it. So let's describe the weather in this region.
Yeah.
It's hot, it's dry, it's windy, and it's prone to drought.
Yeah.
So here's your first clue that we are in a fire-prone region. We live in a fire world. Terrain, fire moves more quickly uphill than downhill. And that's because, think about it this way, when you light a candle, if you hold your hand underneath the candle, is it hot? If you hold your candle out to your hand out to the side of the candle, is it hot? What if you hold your hand directly over the flame? It's hot because heat rises. And so think about as a wildfire is going uphill, then it is preheating everything above it, which means that what's above it catches on fire that much faster, okay? Same analogy, where do you cook your food on a grill? Above the flames, because that's where it's hot. So think about that when you're thinking about your home and relationships to the fuels and the terrains around your home. Because fire moves more quickly uphill. You cannot outrun a fire on a windy day going uphill. So keep that in mind. Again, there's not anything that we can do really about weather or terrain, but it's important to understand that, because when we start talking about things like the home ignition zone, and we say at least 100 feet out from your home is what you want to focus on. If your home is on a slope, you need to focus more downhill than uphill, because fire's not going to be coming very fast at you from uphill. It doesn't like going downhill. Okay? Is that clear as mud? Okay. So now let's talk about fuels a little bit. There are, again, they love triangles, so there are three primary kinds of fuels that we like to talk about, and that's surface fuels, ladder fuels, and crown fuels. I'm going to start at the bottom of the list, which is the top of your fuels, and that's the crowns of your trees. So you think about, you have a tall tree, anything. My professor, Dr. Webster, used to say, is it brush or is it a tree? Well, if you can park your truck under it, it's a tree. So, but anything that's above your head really is going to be your crown fuels. Then you have ladder fuels, and then you have surface fuels on the surface. So surface fuels are going to be like your grasses, flowers, things like that. Think about your surface fuels as being knee-high. Your crown fuels are above your head. What are your ladder fuels? Ladder fuels are anything that will connect the surface fuels to the crown fuels. So if you have a tree and then it's got a bush next to it and it's got grass underneath it, it's all connected. So you've got your crown fuel, you've got ladder fuel, you've got surface fuel. Now what does that mean to you? Well, if the fire is burning nice and slow across this grass right here, and then it hits this right here and it gets to burning in it, you just given it a perfect ladder to get up into this crown. And so it's important to look at your landscaping and think about those sorts of things. You are not doing your trees any favors by letting them be crowded like this. You're not doing them any favors by having bushes underneath them. And that's for several reasons. And one of them is because that's competition for those trees. And so that puts them in a lot of stress when you have low water situations. The other reason is if you have fire come through here, you've got a bush down here, the grass catches the bush on fire, which catches this tree on fire, now both of them are on fire. Whereas if this tree was just by itself and nobody was touching it, the chances of it catching on fire are really low. Does that make sense? So what you're trying to do is break up the continuity of your fuel. You don't want the fire to be able to jump from one thing to another. You want to keep it on the ground, you want to keep it low and slow. So that's about how fire behaves and understanding wildfire behavior. And I know that's a really quick sort of blast of information. That's a lot of information. But the main things are to remember that you live in a wildfire environment, and the thing that you can do the most about is going to be fuels. And you don't want your fuels to be connected to each other. So when you start looking at your landscaping and your home and your fences and the things that are all connected, think about how things are connected to each other and how you could have a possible domino effect going from a ground fire up to your house, which is what you're trying to prevent from happening. So now we're going to talk a bit about how fire spreads. This one has forward, so I don't know what happened to the triangle on this one, but you've got convection, conduction, and radiation are the first three. And we're not going to talk about those a whole lot because they're not especially important in the context of wildfire, because embers or firebrands are actually your main concern when it comes to wildfire. So convection can start a fire that's heat transmitted through gas or liquid. Conduction is heat transmitted through materials. And radiation is heat that's radiated and then absorbed by something else. And so if you think about using your oven, like a convection oven, and you're cooking with heated air, conduction is more like cooking on top of an electric stove top. Radiation is like a radiator works, or like a heater. Or think about a fire in a fireplace, and the heat coming off the fireplace heats up everything around it. That's radiation. And then direct contact with flame or embers. That's what we're more concerned about, because that typically starts more wildfires. And in particular, embers. Embers are the #1 cause of home ignition during a wildfire. And so when you're thinking about how a fire comes through and burns homes down, in your mind and what you imagine and what we see in Hollywood is that this huge wall of flame comes through and it burns everything up in its path. And that's not how it happens. That's almost never how it happens. The way it happens is you have a fire and it catches a house on fire, or a tree on fire, or juniper or something else, and it's blowing all these ash and embers everywhere up in the air. Y'all know what that looks like. You've seen it. If you've ever had a campfire, you've seen little sparks go up in the air. And as that's going up in the air, the wind catches it and it blows. Some of them are going to blow out, but a lot of them are not. And the ones that land, if they land on something that is highly flammable, they're going to catch that whole thing on fire. Embers can easily travel 2 miles. And in some instances, they can travel up to like 8 miles. They can blow a long ways and still burn. Especially when we get really bad conditions, and usually it's in the wintertime, sometimes in the summertime, but we get a really, really stiff wind going. And I mean, I've seen, it was a fire in Mylea, and I watched embers blow across the service road, all the lanes of I-27, the service road on the other side, and 2 more roads. And they blew across, just like snow, but it was fire. And that's not a fun thing to watch. So
in Australia, they said there was a case of an ember the size of a large piece of bark flew 22 miles. 22 miles.
it's perfectly possible. And that's exactly how houses typically catch on fire. So, you know, you have this domino effect of, you've got this rangeland or forest burning, it's blowing up embers everywhere. The embers wash down onto the neighborhood or the home. And then if they land on something that they can quickly ignite, then it starts a bigger fire. And so then you have what we call spot fires. So what causes an ember? Well, first of all, they can be teeny tiny, little bitty bits of sparks like a grain of sand, or they can be huge, like what Ron was talking about, like a piece of bark. Pine needles are really bad about making embers. Actually, all evergreens tend to be bad about making embers, so think about the junipers that are in this canyon. When they catch on fire, they shower sparks everywhere. So pine cones, pieces of branches, tree bark, wooden shingles make really great ember generators. And burning houses. Think about everything that's in your house, the insulation, the wood, the 2x4s, the 2x6s, the chemicals that are in it, everything that's in your house, and all of the things that would generate embers from that. And that's important because you think about, well, my house is protected, it's fine. Well, your neighbor's house may not be. And if they're generating embers, it's putting your house at a greater risk. So, can y'all see that picture at all? Okay. It's just a picture of where some of your most vulnerable places are for your home to ember wash. And I'm going to go through each of those, I think it's 22 different little places to check individually. But when you're looking at your home and you're wondering, you know, I don't want you to memorize this list. I want you to have an idea of the things to look for. And what you're looking for is, you know, when it snows and snow piles up in certain places, that's where embers are going to pile up. So you think about the corners, you think about where your eaves are, your gutters, where your roof comes together, what's that called, the vertices?
Valley.
You know, it's called what?
Valley.
Yes, the valleys in your roof, thank you. Think about where the snow piles up. When the wind blows snow in, where does it pile up? Because that's where embers are going to pile up. Or where do leaves gather around your house? Which poses a very interesting problem, because what's one of the easiest things to catch on fire? Dead leaves. And so the wind is blowing dead leaves into these little corners or into your gutters or into little valleys of your roof, and that's exactly where the wind is also going to blow embers. And an ember would love nothing more than to land in a nice dry pile of leaves. And then suddenly you have a roof fire, right? So think about where does the wind blow debris, where does the wind blow snow, and is that clean, and does that have something there that an ember could catch on fire? And if you're asking the question, will an ember catch this on fire, ask the question, you know, think in your mind of, how do I build a campfire? Who in here has built a campfire before in their lives? What do you start with? Do you start with a big log? No. Do you start with something the size of my arm? No. Do you start with maybe some dry grass or some leaves or cotton ball? Yeah, because if you get an ember on that, that's going to start a fire. Whereas if you put an ember on something the size of my arm, unless it's something really special, it's probably not going to catch on fire. So you want to look at your home and think about the places where embers might be blown in by the wind, which is going to be the same places that it gathers snow or dead leaves. And then you want to remove your tinder and kindling. You want to have big logs there. So you think about your furniture, your patio furniture. You think about, is it wicker? Because that would probably catch on fire pretty easily, especially if it has a cushion on it. Or is it metal and it's not going to burn? Do you have leaves gathered up in that corner? That's probably going to catch on fire because that makes excellent tinder. Whereas if you have, I don't know, trying to think of something else that would go there. A rug. Would that catch on fire pretty easily? Yeah, probably. So you got to think about these little things. Where do your leaves blow? Where does your snow blow? And are you turning your house into the perfect campfire? Don't do that. So we're going to talk about each of these individually. We'll give you some ideas of things to look for. The first one is a wood roof. And in this day and age, I would think that would be self-explanatory, but somehow it is not.
I think we have one in the neighborhood, right? One house that still has a wood roof.
So this is not just looking at your house. If you happen to be the neighbor of the house with the wooden roof, this is something to keep in mind, because if embers blow onto that, especially if it has any kind of dead leaves on it or any kind of debris on it, that just puts it at even more risk. Those shingles, when they start burning, that's the same as a tree burning, and it's going to blow sparks everywhere, which means that puts the neighboring homes in a higher risk. And so, obviously, you would much rather have a fire-resistant roof. Roof openings. This is a big one because even if you have, like my roof is metal, but I know that I have some of those little widgets that go in the little grooves are missing. And all it takes is for embers to blow in there and it's in the attic. And once you have an attic fire, I'm not a structure firefighter, but once you have an attic fire, you're toast, you're done. There's not a lot you can do once you've got fire in the attic. So this is a really important place to look. And I like this picture, it's a good example of, this is a fire resistant roof. It's a very good roofing choice because it's tile, and tile does not burn unless you've got lava. But because this is open and it's not plugged like these are, it's suddenly a risk. So again, you're gonna look for those little places that something as small as a grain of sand could get in, right? Probably not that small, but you know, at least an 1/8 of an inch opening, you wanna take a good look at it, you know, and that's important for everything, you know, for conserving energy for your home and not allowing heat or cool air to escape. It's also important for keeping pests out. So it's not just for fires, it's just good home maintenance.
Yeah, and don't be naive if you've got a tile roof and to think that it won't burn, because the way they're explaining to us at our class, that this is almost just like a pizza oven. If the fire does get into the attic, into that house, you've got that tile roof over the top of it, and then you're talking about a seriously intense fire in that house. So if you've got a tile roof or a metal roof, those are wildly important to check those roof openings right there, and make sure that the installer did plug those, and if they did, you need to get somebody out to plug in those gaps, because those are huge gaps.
Yes, very important. And you know, it's one of those deals where, is this better than this? Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, if you don't have a wooden roof, that's great. If it's fire resistant, you know, that's a huge step in the right direction. This is your next thing to look at. So, you know, this does not compare to this.
With the bricker fire up here too, is once that got into the attic, even though that had clay roof on it, it just made one big oven, and it was really hot inside. So there was no way to fight that fire. It was already going. So we had to do a defensive fire, which means fight the fire from coming over into other houses, whatever. So
You gotta watch those openings.
the same thing can happen even on the metal roof if it's got the little grooves in it. So the embers can get up in there. You just have to check and see. But that doesn't, just because you have a metal roof or a tile roof doesn't mean it's safe. You have to watch to see where embers can come in.
So roof debris, this is exactly what I was talking about. Where does the snow gather? Where do leaves gather? And this is in the valley of your roof. You want to check those places and make sure that you're keeping them clean. You don't want to have leaves piled up there because, like I said, you're just setting up that campfire. So even if your roof is fire resistant, that burning right there is, you know, pine needles and leaves, they put off more embers. So now what you're doing is you're adding to the ember wash that's already going on. So even if your roof doesn't catch on fire, now you've exposed yourself somewhere else. And being fire resistant does not mean being fireproof. And that's important to remember as well. So don't think, you know, I've got a fire resistant roof so I can leave my leaves up there. You need to clean that stuff off. I just turned red instead of green and I'm not sure why.
Oh, yeah.
Well, whatever. So skylights. Plastic skylights are a risk to you because obviously plastic will melt. And so if you have enough embers landing on that hot enough and it's hot enough, you can actually get in there. The ones that open, you want to make sure that if you are under hot fire risk, that you close them. Obviously, you don't want to allow embers inside your house. That's the worst. And then make sure that it's clean. The other thing that I think the biggest thing about skylights is now you've got this protuberance on your roof and that catches everything. So again, think about where snow and leaves gather from the wind because that's where the ember is going to go. So if it's somewhere that you've got leaves getting caught up or snow getting caught up, that's a good place for embers to hang out. A spark arrestor on your chimney. That sounds kind of funny because it's like, that's supposed to keep the sparks from going out. Well, it will also keep sparks from going in. So if you don't have anything on your chimney, you are opening yourself up to having sparks go down your chimney and into your house. Your windows. This, I think, is not one of the biggest issues. It's something to keep in mind. If you're replacing your windows, you want to use at least double pane, but I think we all want to do that anyway for energy efficiency. And the reason for that is if the heat causes a pane of glass to break, if it's double pane, then you've got one more pane of protection. But I think the main thing on this one is actually with your windows is to maintain them and make sure that they are in good condition, and then don't have anything growing underneath them that could burn hot enough to heat that glass up to break it. So if you don't have anything that close to your house that can get hot enough to break that glass, which is pretty hot, then it's not nearly as much of a concern. The other thing is to make sure that all of your windows are closed if you have a wildfire threatening, because obviously, again, you do not want embers blowing in through a window.
Can I add to this for just 1 second?
Sure.
So that there you've got your glass, and then you've got tempered glass. Your regular pane glass breaks at about 180 degrees. They told us at this class that if you have double pane glass, just straight plate glass, that first plate will break at 180 degrees. You've got about 45 seconds to a minute and a half before that second pane breaks. So ultimately, double pane plate glass isn't going to buy you a whole lot of extra time. The trick is to go the tempered glass direction. Tempered glass doesn't break at over 600 degrees. So you've got a huge difference in tempered glass and plate glass. So the double pane glass is awesome if it's tempered, but ultimately if it's plate glass, outside glass breaks, you got about a minute to make a decision on what you're going to do before that second pane breaks.
Which is really important, like I said, if you have something underneath that window that can burn for that long. Grass doesn't burn that long, so if all that you have underneath your window is grass and there's nothing else for a fire to burn, it's gonna burn for about that long, and the chances of it breaking the window are not huge. Which is why, like I said, windows is not a big point for me. I don't think it's nearly as important as taking care of your landscaping and having things away from your house. The big takeaway from this is making sure that your windows are closed if you're under like a red flag warning where it's a high fire danger day. You do not want to have your windows open, especially if you've got curtains. Vents. Vents is a big deal. This one's a lot more important than windows. And it's a lot easier and cheaper to take care of than replacing all of your windows as well. Every entrance into your home, all of your vents, your foundation vents, your attic vents, vents into your cellar or your basement, vents under your eaves, the soffit vents that I didn't even know existed until I had this job. All of those need to be covered with a metal mesh screen, at least 1/8 of an inch diameter small. It's really inexpensive to run to the hardware store and spend $10 on hardware cloth and then just cover those vents. And that's a favorite place for embers to blow in. And what that does is it prevents embers from blowing into your attic. It prevents them from blowing down under your foundation. It also, helps keep stuff out of your house, which is important. I mean, that's what you're trying to do when you're trying to protect your house from embers. You're trying to keep stuff out of your house, which you don't want crap in your house, whether it's bugs or it's embers or whatever. And so that's really important. Rain gutters are one of the major places that houses catch on fire because people don't keep them clean. And so it's really important to keep your rain gutters clean. Again, back to what I said at the beginning of this section. If you are paying attention to where leaves gather and making sure that there aren't any leaves there, that's where your embers are mostly going to gather. I mean, you see this gutter here. It's all pine needles all stuffed in there. It's just waiting for somebody to throw a spark on it, And then even if your gutters are metal, that's going to burn really hot. And it's going to be right there on the edge of your roof. And so any tiny little place that's exposed is now huge, huge threat to that. So that's basically a house maintenance thing anyway, right? Just keep your gutters clean. And that's gonna make your gutters last longer, and it's gonna help keep your house look nicer too. Siding. Siding is another one of those, I don't like getting hung up on siding. It can be really important. I think the main thing for me on siding is that vinyl is not a good choice, mainly because it melts pretty quickly, not even all that hot temperatures. And so it's not the best choice, but if you're keeping everything away from your house, then that can make up for it and make it not as big a deal. I'll show you all a picture in a little bit of what I'm talking about, but vinyl is basically the worst one that I can think of. So even wood is better as long as it's well maintained. You want to keep it caulked and keep it smooth, keep the cracks filled, keep it painted, keep it maintained. So again, taking care of your house is basic maintenance of your home that you need to do anyway. Don't come look at my house after I say that though. And then replace rotten wood is really important too, because rotten wood will catch on fire a lot quicker, especially dry rot, which is basically what we have here. So dry rotted wood will catch on fire quite a bit quicker than good wood in good condition. Wood piles, this is a big one. Who keeps their wood pile next to their house in the winter time so they don't have to walk out there to get wood? Yeah.
I knew you were gonna read that.
It's too cold.
I knew we'd leave that in.
Yeah, so that's a big one. And so you should keep your wood pile at least 30 feet from your house. Because what is this? That looks like a campfire to me that I just put on my porch. And now where do leaves gather? They catch on every little corner and every little crevice. And now you've got leaves blowing underneath here. That's exactly where embers are going to blow. And now you've just built a bonfire on your porch, which is not the place you want to have a bonfire. So funny story about that. My husband actually caught his dad's house on fire when he was a kid because they had the wood on the porch, and he took some ashes out. And I'll tell you that that's not a good experience. You don't want that. So what can you do about this if you absolutely are not interested in hauling all of your wood across your yard in the winter time?
Well, I don't feel bad, I'll have.
Cover it with a fireproof, fire resistant cover.
Yeah, cover it with a fire-resistant cover, keep the leaves cleaned out. Best thing to do is move that 30 feet from your house. And what we do is we just bring a couple of pieces at a time and put them on our front porch. So whatever we're going to burn for a couple of days, that's what we put on our porch. The rest of it we keep away from our house. If you can't do that, or you just don't want to do that, the next best thing would be to cover it with a fire-resistant cover, and then keep your leaves cleaned off of it. So,
Well, I don't feel so bad, I'm not on the porch, so. Just catch the fence on fire.
Okay, decks. Decks are like the worst. If you have a deck, you need to get rid of it. They are really terrible for catching houses on fire. We have a deck, and eventually I'm gonna have to replace it, but they gather leaves in the corners, they're wooden, they're attached to your house, so now you've got that domino effect of going from one thing to another. A lot of times people have them connected to a fence, I do. It's a really terrible situation that you just put your house in, because now you've got all this wood up against it. Things that you can do about an existing deck: make sure that the bottom of it is completely enclosed so embers can't blow underneath it, because that's a big deal. Because where do leaves blow? Right underneath that sucker. And then you have embers blowing right underneath it. And how does heat travel? Straight up. So now you just built a fire underneath your deck that's going to build a fire that's right next to your house, which is not a good situation to be in.
I don't know if anybody's on the, but if you want to go walk someplace that you know how not to do, go to the chapel. And they got that deck around there, and look at the underbrush under the chapel. If that is just a fire hazard, so you need to, that needs something to be addressed, and whoever's on the, chapel board or working with the chapel, they need to take care of that. And then that's a pretty bad area. That's a kill zone for us. So that means that if we go fight a fire up there, our chances are our firemen coming out are not real good, because that's just a area that's the walls of the canyon and everything are just gonna create a real firestorm. So prevention is the thing, not sending us into fire, okay?
So you're gonna wanna make sure that you don't have stuff underneath your deck, enclose it. Best to enclose it with like metal. There are a lot of different ways that you can do that and still make it look nice. Then keep the top of it cleaned off and in good condition. If you're gonna replace it at some point, you're remodeling, replace it with a fire resistant material. They make new decking material now that's fire resistant that you don't have to paint, so, win-win. But things like having patio furniture on your deck and rugs on your deck, really think about those things because again, you're building a campfire right there next to your house, which is not a good place to have a campfire. So we've talked about porch and deck accessories off and on. Again, your outdoor furniture, rugs, your grills and things, dried flower arrangements. We're going to talk about those a little bit in the next slide. Yeah, flower boxes. I mean, what do y'all think would happen if a number landed in that? Now imagine that's a single pane, non-tempered glass window. What do you think is going to happen? Those vinyl blinds are not going to do anything to stop fire from getting in that house once that window breaks. Plus, once this catches on fire, you've got fire right here and all of that's wood. So if you're going to have your flower boxes, keep them maintained. Keep it green, keep it wet. Better to not have a flower box right up against your window. Just like when we're talking about the windows, if you don't have tempered glass, double pane windows, then you definitely don't want anything right up against your windows or right underneath your windows. Even if you do have tempered glass, double pane windows, you still don't want to have that stuff that close to your house. It's a bad idea. But if you're going to, you've got to keep it maintained. There's a couple of slides in here. It says do not use wood bark mulches, and I professionally disagree with that. A well-maintained mulch is wet and moist, and it will burn, but it burns very slowly and it doesn't burn very hot, and it's not a hard fire to put out. I prefer a wooden mulch that's well-maintained, even though it will burn because it's just better for your soil. It just flat out is. If you're not going to maintain it though, then you really need to go with a gravel mulch or a crushed granite mulch. It's a lot smarter choice for you then. Because it's really important that if you're going to use wooden mulch, that you keep it moist and you replace it regularly and keep your soil turned. So that's one of those I don't really agree with. Do not use wood mulch. Do not use wood mulch if you're not going to take care of it. Same thing with do not have flower boxes underneath your windows if you're not going to maintain it, because it will just cause you a problem down the road. Your eaves, again, going back around your house and looking for places that you don't want things to get in, these little cracks, and it's just as simple as filling it with some caulk. It's an easy, it's not easy if you don't like it and it matters like I don't, but it's a pretty easy sort of fix. It's a cheap fix. Get you some caulk and fill those cracks in because you do not want embers blowing in there. Because if an ember blows in there, what's it going to get into? And the insulation. Yes, ma'am.
Another thing you've got to think about when you're in your house or in your attic, you feel the breeze coming in because it's sucking in. Your house is just going to suck that ember in. It doesn't just blow in there, it gets sucked in. So that's why it's so important to feel it.
Yes, absolutely. Or put screen over your vents. Because you still have to have airflow. You just don't want the opening to be big enough for just whatever to come in. You just want good airflow. Flower beds, this is another one. If you're going to use wood mulch, you have to maintain it. You have to keep it moist. You have to keep it turned. You have to take care of it. If you're not going to take care of it, replace it with something that won't burn like crushed granite, and use good low water use plants for your flower beds. You know, it's just one of those deals that if you can't take care of it or you don't want to take care of it, then you need to get a low maintenance system that will survive without the water and that will still stay green. It's important to take care of your landscaping. That is such a big deal. I mean, it's just such a big deal to take care of your landscaping. If it's green, it will still burn. But back to what we talked about on what makes a fire intense, what makes it move fast, what makes it burn hot. Having moist green grass does not burn fast and it does not burn hot. You know, it can't because it's having to burn all that water out. It will still burn it, but I don't mind putting out a grass fire when the grass is green. It's a pretty simple process, you know. I don't want to be out there in a 70-mile wind per hour day and it's 110 degrees and it's just blowing and going through dead stuff. That's dangerous. It's wildly dangerous. People die doing that. I'm not going to go get out in front of it. But if you've got your yard maintained, that slows it down. And so, you know, get back to talking about how fires flow through, and Rhonda's going to get into this in a little bit, about, you know, you think about how is the fire department going to respond. Do you think they're going to come to your house? Well, think about it. How many houses are in this canyon and how many fire trucks there are and how many firefighters there are. So I want you to think about that because Ron's going to talk about that in a little bit. Vehicles, this is one that we typically don't think about, but your vehicle will catch on fire. And if it's got open windows, it will really catch on fire. So one of the things that you can do about that is, you know, put it in the garage if you can, park it away from your house if you can, close it up before you leave. Or, you know, evacuate and take it with you would be great too. But if this one I like because it's not so much in this area, but some of my other communities, people like to collect yard ornaments that are, you know, vehicles that don't have tires anymore and don't have windows, and it looks real cool until it catches on fire. And what all is in that? You've got gasoline, you've got oil, you've got all kinds of grease, you've got all kinds of transmission fluid, and all of that stuff burns, and it burns nasty, and it burns hot. And that's a whole another kind of fire that we're talking about.
We have had fires out like that out here. And so it's nothing new. And so, but just, you know, everybody has to realize that we're not exempt from a lot of these things.
So again, it's important, you know, think about these kinds of things, especially when you're under a high fire danger. Garage door. Same sort of thing that we've been talking about. Can embers blow underneath your garage door because that little insulator pad is gone? You know, fix that, because it's not just embers that will blow under there. Everything will go under there, right? And you don't want that. So if you're getting leaves blown into your garage, there's a problem, and you probably want to look and see where that's coming from and plug that hole up. Make sure that your garage door is closed if a wildfire is threatening. You want your house closed up as much as possible. Garbage cans and recycling bins. This isn't one that I would have thought of, but obviously your trash will catch on fire. So make sure, for other reasons as well, because you know raccoons and possums do exist, make sure that you keep a lid on it, and it's a tight lid. Metal trash cans are better than plastic, but if you're going to use plastic, make sure you keep it covered. Newspaper recycling bins. What's a great way to start a fire? Use wadded up newspaper. So don't have that right next to your house, right? Move that away from your house or keep it inside your garage is another choice for that. You just want to keep it covered. You don't want it exposed. Wooden fences. This is the last one of these. Wooden fences are a great ladder fuel from wherever in your yard to your house. So if you have a wooden fence attached to your house, then you have created that domino ladder fuel right up to your house. So what are some things you can do about that? Well, an easy fix is to put a metal gate between your house and your fence. That way you still have your privacy fence, which I guess the best choice would be to replace your wooden fence with metal. But, you know, if you don't want to do that, or that's kind of expensive, then replace just the one section that touches your house with metal. You can still make it look nice. You don't have to use chain link. There's all kinds of wrought iron gates that you can put that look really nice when you do that. And make sure you've got at least 5 feet of separation from your house and your fence. The next one, this is a picture. This is a picture from, I think that's in East Texas, from a fire probably 6 or 7 years ago. The neighbor's house is over here. It was completely destroyed, like down to the foundation, burned down to the foundation. And it was on fire. This fence connected the neighbor's house to this house over here. And a firefighter was driving through here, and he saw that this fence was on fire, and he kicked the gate open. And that saved this house from burning down. So what's something that you can do, you can kick this gate open. If you know that you're under high fire danger and you haven't replaced that gate with metal, which is a better idea, then leave it open. This is what I was talking about, vinyl siding. You see how close the fire got right here? They have a sidewalk right here, which is a great idea, having a little fire break. And that stopped this grass fire. And because this gate got kicked open, that stopped this fence fire from getting to the house. But that's still a good, 7, 8 feet from the house? And look what it did to that vinyl siding. If this fire had burned any longer, there's no way that this house wouldn't have caught on fire. The insulation is being exposed. So this is what I mean by vinyl siding is probably not the best choice. And if you do have vinyl siding and you can't replace it, then you definitely need to make sure that you keep everything away from your house that could possibly burn a nice hot fire, because it will melt your vinyl. It will absolutely just melt right off.
Did you go through
No.
See, then catch up is going to hit once we finish on this. Okay. So here's an example. So you can see a fire started here, and there's one right here. Do y'all have any ideas of what maybe happened there?
Leave.
Yeah, maybe. This was the door jamb right here. So there was a flower pot right here that had dead plants in it and with mulch that was not maintained. And that caught on fire. And then this door jamb under here, that was rotted wood, it was dry rotted, and that caught on fire. And it just so happened that some firefighters were coming by and they were able to put that little spot fire out really quickly, but didn't like me today. But again, you want to look for these places. Can you imagine in the wintertime that the wind would blow snow right there, or in the fall that the wind would blow dead leaves right there? That's exactly where your rivers are going to go. So again, you want to look for those kind of places. So that's our talk about Ember Wash. Does anybody have any questions about Ember Wash? Does that kind of make sense what you're looking for? I don't want you to memorize this list and go to your yard and look for individual things. I want you to look at the whole picture of your yard and say, these things probably put me at risk. And the key points to look for are openings into your house, all of the openings into your house, corners, crevices, and valleys. Those are the key places that you really want to focus on. And landscaping away from your house. So we're going to talk about the home ignition zone, which is all about taking care of that area directly threatening your home. So there are 3 zones that we look at. The most important is 0 to 30 feet from your house. The second most important would be 30 to 100 feet from your house. And then further out that you want to look at is 100 to 300. So who remembers what I said about terrain affecting this number? So when you get to how far out do I need to look, you need to look at your terrain. Because if you're on a slope, and a lot of y'all are, then you need to go further downslope than upslope. So you want to do at least 100 feet upslope and probably 300 feet downslope depending on what your slope is looking like, right? So who in here owns 300 feet around their house? Yeah, a lot of us don't. And so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this just right now, but in the 100 to 300 feet away from your house, I know that says 200, but 300 feet if you're on a slope, you just don't want a heavy accumulation of fuels. So it's okay to have trees there, it's okay to have some brush there, but you don't want it to be all touching. You don't want it to, to be overgrown. You still want it to be clean. You still want it to be mowed. You want to be able to mow it. Zone 2 is 30 to 100 feet. This is where you really want to kind of work on having your trees in clusters. You definitely want to keep it really well mowed, short grass. You, again, don't want things touching. You want to have trees further apart. For the zones 30 to 100 feet, think about how a nice park looks like. You've got some trees, you've got some short grass, but it's pretty clear underneath and it's kind of spread out and open. That's what you want it to look like. The most important zone is right next to your house, and this is where you really want to pay attention. You want to pay attention to what's really close to your house, and again, you do not want to have those ladder fuels that will connect the grass to your home. You do not want to build that campfire up to your house. That's not where you want to keep your firewood. You want to keep it in zone 2. It's better if you have your propane tanks in zone 2. You want to keep that mowed and watered if you can. And then keep your limbs pruned up at least 10 feet. Again, if the limbs are touching the ground or they're close to the ground, the grass can catch that on fire. You want to disconnect that. That's where you want to landscape wisely. Use concrete or gravel or sidewalks to break up your yard. Have your flower beds further away from your house. I am the world's worst about it. I really badly want to put all my flower beds right against the house because that's the way my mom did it, it's the way my grandmother did it. But really, having it further away from your house means you get to see it from inside the house, which is nice, and it still looks nice, and it's better for your house. And it also kind of keeps that moisture and everything away from your house, which is better anyway. So what about this house? Do y'all think that landscaping looks pretty good? I showed this picture a lot, so I bet y'all have seen this before because it's my favorite. Looks pretty good. The grass is short. The landscaping is pretty far back. You've got a little bit right here, which isn't great, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. Cross ties are not a very good choice, but it's okay. I mean, it's not going to burn real fast, and it's not connected to the house either. So, but mainly it looks pretty good, right? Trees are limbed up pretty good. I mean, I know there's snow on the ground, but, looks pretty good. So now, this next picture is coming back to what we talked about, the 300 feet around your house. So the house we just looked at is this one right here, and this is their neighbor. So obviously that's not a good choice for landscaping. If you want to be fire resistant, pest resistant, disease resistant, that's terrible. So if embers fall in that's going to light on fire. It just doesn't have a choice. And it's going to be a really hot, fast, disgusting, nasty fire. And I'm not going in there, Ron's not going in there, and Bob's not going in there. We're not going in there to fight it. It's just going to burn. What did we talk about, ember wash? Can you imagine the embers that are going to come off this fire? Now, how do you think this house is as far as is it going to survive that fire? Its chances just got lowered a bunch. I mean, they may still survive.
It's going to survive because they're going to sit on each side of that and they're going to spray the houses down.
Yeah. I mean,
Been there, done that a couple times out here.
but do you see how that changed the risk a bunch? And that's why it is so important for you to involve your neighbors. Because most of us have overlapping home ignition zones. Most of us share a home ignition zone with a neighbor. And you can't make your neighbor do anything, but you can talk to them and you can set a good example for them and you can invite them to come to these meetings. explain some of this information to them. And if they're just really bullheaded and they're just really terrible to work with, then that means that you have to work that much harder to prepare your home, because what you're not gonna be worried about direct flame as far as the fire comes to your house and it burns across your house. You're looking at Everwash. So if your neighbors are really terrible and they look like this and they're happy about it, and they refuse to change that, that means that all of these things that we've talked about, looking for these holes in your home, looking for these cracks and crevices, covering your vents with mesh, becomes that much more important, because that's what you're gonna have to do to lower your risk. Because if you have this next door, that raises your risk significantly, and you're gonna have to prepare yourself. Sorry, I went over. Got a little late start, and then, oops, there we go. There's a website, it's Earthman Landscaping Plant Selector, and this is their website. And you can go there. We've added a fire resistant rating to the plants that they have on that list, so you can look for plants that are environmentally friendly and that they don't need a lot of pesticides, fertilizers, or water. And you can also get a fire resistant rating on those, which I think is kind of nice for trying to figure out what kind of plants that you want. Because it's important, you know. Does anybody have any questions?
I do have one. Are these slides available, this slideshow available? I'd like to get this posted to the POA website,
Yeah, I
so
can
that
share with
folks
you
can
guys.
actually look at it.
Actually,
Yeah, I've noticed as well,
Ron,
you're videoing this.
Y'all can just keep that jump drive and that's on there, and you can have it.
Why don't I just copy that file onto my
Oh,
drive?
you just keep it. I got a lot of those.
If nothing else, we could get a link to it, but for those folks, I mean, obviously, we'd love to have everybody here, but
Right.
this has opened my eyes to a lot of things here. And so I think it would be quite useful to at least have that resource available. to
You
folks.
bet. You bet. You can make that happen.
Thanks, Mylea.
Okay, everybody, thank you, Mylea, for bringing
Mylea's
us.
been with us when we first started. We did our first overview of the canyon, where our hot spots were. We've improved a lot, but, you know, it's like Ron said, it's not, you know, a matter of wildfires, it's a matter of when we'll have a wildfire.
I did.
And it's a matter of if we can slow it down before it takes over the entire canyon. We don't have a lot of time. It's gonna be through here within 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We'll have houses burning or whatever, you know. So anyway, it's prevention, and then it's escape plans and things like that. But even we've changed some of that up since we went to the school in San Antonio.
We have a lot of planning to do. So this little slide I put together, it's only 21 slides long. A lot of it is what Mylea covered on a little bit, so we can fast forward through some of it. But this is all just stuff that I wanted y'all to kind of get a grasp on. Mylea did a great job on some of this. The objectives of this, obviously, is just to let y'all know that we are in a wildland urban environment. We decided all that this is where we wanted to live. We wanted to live amongst the wildlife and the trees and the grass. So we have to understand it. We have to understand how homes can ignite. I think Malea's done a great job of explaining to y'all how your home's going to ignite, the factors that will increase the potential for your home to ignite. And the most important thing to me that y'all can take from this is that recognize that when we all get behind this, that it's going to be a huge benefit to our community. This isn't just for your home. This isn't just to protect your things. It's much larger than that. And so that's what we're going to cover. So the wildland areas that we talk about are interface areas, intermix areas, and then just open space. Interface is where you live next to something. Intermix is where we live in it. We're in an intermix. We are right smack dab in the middle of it. Here's a little map that kind of shows how we're growing with different, I know it's a little bit hard to see, doing different interfaces and intermixes and how we're kind of growing and where the country is. It says we're in a low, very low housing density area, but still, I mean, we are in a fire area. The reason this is cause for concern, in 1985, 1,400 homes were destroyed in Florida, North Carolina, California, and that motivated this Wildfire Strikes Home conference. Really woke America up into, okay, we can do something about this. 1987, they started the Wildland Urban Interface Program, where we got get our Firewise, and it's done federal, state, and local through the National Fire Prevention Association, which was a conference that Bob and I attended last month. In 2000, really a huge investment by the federal government, $1.2 billion in the funding of our woodland fire management programs. You got cities like Austin that are literally flying drones over their entire city. They're mapping out every lot and they're color coding every single lot based on its fire risk. You've got certain cities in California that go, well, we've got to figure out a different plan. National Fire Plan doesn't just mean how to prevent fire, but what do you do in case of fire? Some cities have decided, well, we're not going to try to evacuate. We've got 2 ways in and 2 ways out. And, you know, in the Panhandle, when all those fires happened 2 years ago, most of those deaths occurred in the evacuation. Those people were stuck in traffic and the fire burned over their cars and they're gone. Some communities in California and other states, and it's a topic that I think we should discuss in the future, but not here. But some cities are designing shelter-in-place parts of their town, like the ranch house, where instead of asking everybody to get in their car and flee uphill and get in each other's way, maybe we can find shelter-in-place areas in our community where we can go to and let it pass. Because as Bob mentioned earlier, one of the things that was staggering to me at this conference, they told us that the fire starts at Buffalo. And in a normal windy situation for Lovell County, because the guy was from Austin, but he was raised in Lovell. He was very familiar with Ransom Canyon. He spent a lot of time out here as a kid. And he said, in his honest opinion, he could expect a wildfire to move from Buffalo to the other end of the canyon in 15 to 25 minutes. So when you think about 15 to 25 minutes, guys, that doesn't leave us a whole lot of options, right? As far as what are we going to do? So if we wait until that is upon us, well, we're just too late. So we mentioned this, wildfire is inevitable. Lightning, humans, we've been doing this. Indians use wildfire extensively in their management. Every ecosystem, just about every one in the United States was developed and maintained by fire. We talked about this earlier. We eliminated fire, grazing, and everything else. So in 2005 to 2015, we had 9.6 million acres burned in the United States. Generally, 100 to 200 years ago, it would be close to 100 million acres that would be burning in the United States. So we've cut that down 90%. So, like Mylea said, that sounds good to some people, but we've just really ramped up 90% of the fuels. So now fires are larger and more extreme during these extreme weather conditions. This is the wildfire paradox that we've now kind of gotten ourselves into. We've excluded wildfire from a lot of the practices in life. So now when we do get them, they're big. There's a scientist. His name, I noticed, is right here in this information that Mylea gave us, Professor Dr. Jack Cohen. He's the man. He's the guy that really went back and thought, okay, we need to look at wildfires because they're not this big flaming wall, right? So Dr. Jack Cohen has put together a little 11-minute video. I think it's really a neat video that kind of talks about wildfires. So let's just watch this. 11 minutes.
Uncontrolled, extreme wildfires are inevitable. These are the conditions when wildland-urban interface disasters occur. The hundreds to thousands of houses destroyed during a wildfire. Does that mean that the wildland-urban interface disasters are inevitable as well? No. We have great opportunities as homeowners to prevent our houses from igniting during wildfires. Most of our perceptions are that these big wildfires are something we can't do anything about. They're overwhelming. If huge organizations can't control the wildfire, how is it that somehow I can do something to my house to keep it from burning down? It's not a matter of controlling the wildfire, it's a matter of changing those conditions of the house and its immediate surroundings. There's a lot that we can do to the little things to our house and its immediate surroundings in order to reduce the ignition potential of that house. I'm going to do an assessment on this house for its ignition vulnerabilities. The assessment is what all of us homeowners can do. Currently, we're not in fire season, but it's getting hot and it's getting dry, so this is a perfect time before the smoke's in the air to do this assessment. The great opportunity we have as homeowners is that we can do the little things around our house to keep our home from igniting. We can actually separate our house from the extreme wildfire. We don't have to rely on the control of the extreme wildfire in order to keep our house from burning down. Over the last 30 years, my colleagues and I have done research involving laboratory experiments, field experiments, and post-fire disaster assessments to quantify and qualify the relationship between a wildfire and a destroyed home. What we found is that the high-intensity flames, more than 100 feet away from the house, are largely incapable of igniting the house directly. It's the little things that seem to be destroying the houses. The burning embers, we call them firebrands, lofted out of the high-intensity wildfire to land in the community, sometimes directly on houses as well as the surroundings. It's not 100-foot flames, it's a pile of firebrands that would fit in the palm of our hand. So my colleagues and I designed a firebrand, an ember shower demonstration. We have a full-size house. It's got bark mulch and pine needles around the base. It's got pine needles in the rain gutters. It's got pine needles on the roof. We have an ember generator that then casts a brand blizzard at this house. In order for those firebrands to be effective in igniting the house, they either have to ignite the house directly,
9 seconds.
or they have to ignite something around the house that then can spread to the house. The main factors determining this home's ignition potential are right here. The home's characteristics related to its immediate surroundings. For our assessment, our perspective changes to this house being one of fuel for the potential ignition. Look around your house and see where the litter, the leaves and the needles have piled up, and visualize that that's going to be where firebrands begin to pile up and collect. So here we have pine needle litter right up next to the house. It's on the steps. It could ignite and start this wall and step area on fire. It also can ignite on this lathing, which is right up underneath the wood shingle siding, and ignite that. This doesn't burn with high intensities. It burns with low intensities, but it's extremely important. In fact, on this house, it easily could be the critical factor that leads to its total destruction. If this house had rain gutters, this litter would be in the rain gutters, potentially igniting and putting flame right up at the eave line, potentially igniting the roof.
Potentially igniting the roof. Cliffhanger. Cliffhanger.
And going into the attic. On this side of the house, what our attention should be on is this gable vent. It's the most exposed kind of vent. I noticed that it's got fire mesh screen, which certainly helps keep large firebrands from going into the attic and potentially igniting this house. One of the things we looked at were vents during the brand blizzard.
That's the vent.
The brands are directly impacting that
That's
vent
inside the
opening.
house.
The burning brands can blow right into the attic and potentially ignite the material that's in the attic.
That's why you need that 1/8 inch.
The remedy is simple. All we have to do is use finer mesh screen to cover the openings. One of the important aspects that we demonstrated was that you don't have to have a metal roof in order to keep the house from igniting from firebrand. What we showed was that any roof that doesn't ignite and spread fire can survive the brand blizzard.
That's the needles burning, not the roof.
So as we previously demonstrated, composition shingle roofs with pine needles on them don't represent a significant ignition problem. But look here, we've got a wood-sided wall coming down to the top of the roof where this needle deposition, when it ignites, is going to put flame contact right on the side of the wood wall. This results in flame contact and high ignition potential, resulting in the destruction of this house. The house includes more than just itself if there are outbuildings that are close enough to ignite and spread to the house. So maybe we have a shed or we've got a chicken coop which then can burn long enough to ignite the shed that's next to that, which then ignites and burns sufficiently in order to ignite the house. So we need to be as concerned about the surroundings of our outbuildings and their condition as we do our house.
I looked into landscaping, I looked into fireproof home building, I looked into fireproof lawn furniture. I mean, I was going for everything that I could for the safest fire safety you could. And we had a checklist, no firewood stacked next to the house. All of our lawn furniture was fire rated. I wanted to feel like if there was a fire, we had the absolute best chance possible of us and our house surviving.
So some of the little things that begin to get a house during an extreme wildfire from the firebrands are, for example, something as simple as a broom being left out. Flammable deck furniture, where we've got flammable cushions on the furniture on the deck next to the house. The cushions ignite from the firebrands, they ignite the deck railing, which is connected to the house.
We put 3 foot of rock siding all the way around up the house, as well as in our landscaping 3 feet out of crushed rock. We talked to people, all it took was one thing, a firewood stacked in the wrong place, or lawn furniture caught fire on their porch. One tiny little technique that wasn't followed.
Well, knowledge is key. The more you know, the more you can increase your chances, and not always does that have to cost money, right? It's just knowledge. It's still a shock to go through a fire, but to come back and see your home, right? That's such a good feeling.
Flame contact on the house is a really bad idea. What we want to make sure of is that we don't get flame contact on the house. We don't have a fire burning across pine needle litter, for example, and making direct contact with the house. But that only takes 5 feet around the house in order to keep the flames away. Let's take a look at the surrounding area of the house. Adjacent to this wood wall, we've got these green shrubs. So the question is, are these green shrubs a big problem and do they have to be removed? Well, as long as we've got green foliage without dead material, we're pretty good. But if we take a look, we've got dead material in the canopy and we've got dead material deposited under the wood wall. What we want to do to keep the shrubs is to prune out all the dead material within the canopy as well as underneath in order to keep the wall and the shrubs from igniting. put out all the fires. We don't need to make sure that no fire occurs within the neighborhood. We do need to make sure that there isn't high-intensity fire within 100 feet, and we want to make sure that surface fire doesn't come directly to the house and ignite it. We definitely can't have a flammable wood roof on our house. It's the most susceptible to firebrand ignitions. But there are many things that occur on a seasonal basis. Cleaning up the litter around the base of the house, out of the rain gutters, making sure that we've swept the deck of pine needle litter and leaves, and making sure that our firewood piles aren't on the deck, and making sure that we've cut the grass and not having things right up next to the house that can burn. We've just taken a look at this home, but it's obvious that every home and every property are going to be different. That's why it's very important for us to seek information so that we can find the vulnerabilities to ignition of our own homes. Remember, if your home doesn't ignite, it doesn't burn. You've got to act now to address these little things long before the fire ever starts.
Okay, so as you can see, Dr. Cohen is a professional. He's been doing this a long time, and he looks at fire in a totally different way than most people had for centuries. And he realized that fire didn't just rush through a community and catch everything in fire at once. It was a step-by-step process of the fire moving ahead, heating something ahead of it, catching it on fire, and it just continued, right? So Dr. Cohen realized really fast that there were these little steps that really do matter. I know some of that was kind of redundant, but it's really good to see it visually, what that fire is going to happen. Now, I feel kind of, and we are in a church, but were they miracle houses? People ask all the time, man, why didn't that house burn? Was it miracle vegetation? But when we're talking about fires, ultimately we can't really talk about, the miracles. Talking about spreading amongst the community, although initiated by the wildfire, most destruction did not come from the wildfire. It occurred independently. And this is supposed to say fire does not flow like lava or a tsunami to explode houses in the ball of flames, right? That's what we see on the news. That's what they love to show, the wall of fire exploding homes. That's not what's happening. It's the fire brands and the surface fires and things that are moving along. We talked about ground surface and that. Okay, this is where it pertains to us. This is where I want it to really hit home, because I know there's only 20 of us here maybe, right? But we've all got neighbors, we've all got friends, and we all talk to each other. And so this is what the 20 of us can go home and really pound in. Guys, assuming that all firefighters and resources were on site the very first day that fire begins, and that firefighter safety was not an option, okay? Here we go. 20 firefighters in Ransom Canyon. We have 10 that respond on average to a call. 2 trucks, 1 tanker, and a brush truck. I'm not even going to count our little F-150s. So we have over 600 homes. I was guessing here because I know we have about 800 lots. Chief, am I close? We have over 2,000 residents. Okay. With the resources that we have, we can only cover 3 houses. That is less than 1% of the homes in Ransom Canyon. 99% of our homes in this canyon will be unprotected.
Question on that. You ought to, if you're going to continue to do this presentation, I think you ought to include that we do have mutual aid agreements with every fire department in the county and some out of the county.
Yes, sir. Okay.
So that's a little deceiving with.
Understood. Yes, sir. So on that note, we do have mutual aid from Buffalo, from Slayton, from Roosevelt. Yes, sir.
Can I clarify, how long does it take for them to respond in that case?
About 15, 20 minutes.
Okay.
About the same as what it does for us to over them.
It's over by in many cases where we've had fires.
So we do have mutual aid,
Yeah.
and we can get resources, more resources into the canyon. But I'm just speaking on ours. And yes, we do have mutual aid. We can expect the help to start heading our way.
And keep in mind too, that if it's a really bad day here, it's probably a really bad day somewhere else too. And so, just because you've got friends that will come in and help you, if it's a bad day and you've got a fire, Buffalo Springs is probably threatened too. And so, you cannot depend on that.
Well, if it happens over, and our biggest concern is to our west, which is Buffalo, which we talked about our escape routes and things like that. If you look at the the debris, the growth that we have out here right now, the dryness of that's out here with the dead flowers or whatever they are. You know, if the fire starts, that's gonna cut off this road here too. So then we have one exit point. So that's what we've changed up our thinking after seeing this, that there's many places that we need to identify in the canyon that people can go and have several options. They can stay in place if their house is secure. They can go to the ranch house, which is on an island. They remember that that if it's black, it's already burned, you're pretty safe in the black. We're safe as firefighters in the black. But there's also the city hall would be a good place for people to go. So there's places that we can go that, other than just the escape routes. We used to say, ready, set, go, but how much time do we have? We're unique. And this is something that happens. If you look at Bishop Hills and Amarillo, nice big houses, and they lost a few of those out there. Lake Tanglewood, they lost houses out there. You go north, you go to Borger, you go to Fritch, you go to a lot of areas. One of the biggest fires we ever had was the Mylea fire up north of Amarillo. And that cost 7 firefighters their lives, I believe, on that one. So, yes, sir.
This evacuation plan and all of this other stuff, is that in an easily accessible form? Do we have any papers, things? I'd like to include this in a package.
James is our emergency response coordinator. James has all this information.
Okay.
And this is all stuff, this is just stuff we're milling over. We have not made a single decision on this because we haven't had the proper meetings on any of this. These are just options. But yes, James has all of that. He has the evacuation plan. He has.
Also, when you talk about mutual aid, it's standard protocol. If it's a large enough fire, if it's a structure fire, 2 departments are dispatched immediately. And if we get there, and we find out it's nothing, we can stop the other department. Most of the time, they come on anyway, just to make sure everything's all right.
I don't know, in the last 20 years, we've had 5 major fires out here. I think we've lost part of or all of one home. And then an RV fire that was beside a home. And in each of those instances, there was no damage to anything surrounding that. It was contained completely within that. I think this is more addressing if we have, and I know everybody knows what they are, the basket flowers that stand about this tall that bloom real pretty purple. If we have something that takes off in one of those, you've got a lot beside your house, you've got a bunch around your home. And if we have something like that, it's going to burn that fuel quickly, and it's going to burn hot. And I think that's what Bob is addressing, like, we've got a bunch of them going back into the canyon along the front gate road. And if that catches, that's going to block this evacuation route. But again, it'll block the evacuation route right there at the corner, but still leaves you 2 routes to be able to go, and that's going to be all the way around the far side of the lake and out, or out the back gate, or as he was saying, to City Hall to shelter in place, to the ranch house to shelter in place. So
I just raised this because I'd like to get that to any residents that are out. We can include that with the packet of information.
This whole thing, I guess, is just in the beginning phases.
It is.
You said y'all changed this up.
Oh, yeah, we haven't changed anything. We're just talking about. We learned this information. And when these communities decided to do shelter in place, you got to imagine that was a tough choice. Because that's a scary thought, telling all your people to go to a place and shelter. But it ultimately was that they decided that was the best decision for their community. And it's a very new way of thinking. I think she said there were only 4 cities in California that have adopted this policy of shelter in place.
Well, when you look at places like Paradise, which is one of the big ones, they lost a lot of people here lately. And you look at what happened to there with the visibility, the smoke, the dead-end roads, 2 ways in, 2 ways out. And they lost fire trucks, they lost everybody. They got hung up in traffic jams and burned the cars and the fire trucks and everything.
Let's move along a little bit, guys. We've got about 15 minutes. I know everybody's got stuff to do. So the bottom line is, most of the homes are going to be unprotected, right? Depending on mutual aid and what we've got, but I think we can all agree that most of the homes are going to be unprotected. If they are ignited, most likely they will burn, and they will burn down. If we are Firewise, the right preparations are made, our volunteer fire department, our police chief and his staff, we can all do a better job doing our jobs to those homes that are in immediate danger. Being a Firewise community helps the rescuers do their job more efficiently. Plain and simple, right? It protects your home and it allows us to do our job just that much better. Quick stats here, a little case study they did what I thought was really interesting. At the Bel Air Brentwood fire, don't ask me when that was, but the houses that had done their job at 30 to 60 feet in a home emission zone, 95% of those homes survived. Okay, at the Painted Cave fire, 86% of those homes survived. Those are stats that you just cannot deny. If you put in the time and you put in the work, you've got a great chance of your home surviving, right? So that's what we're talking about. This is why this is so important. Wildfires are not going to flow through residential. It's going to be determined by local conditions. If it's an extreme fire and everybody's houses are lighting one after another, then we can't do anything. We are done. We are just going to sit back. If simultaneous burnings do not occur, then we can have an extreme wildfire. We can just have it without an extreme fire disaster, right? We can't prevent fires, but we can prevent fire disasters. So that's the main thing. We talked about the triangle earlier. We talked about the types of heat transfer. We talked about fire brands. I'm going to skip through that. We talked about no wood roofs, the 1/8 inch screening. Most homes that were built in Ransom at the time, 1/4 inch screening was acceptable to code. And it still is. But 1/8 is what's recommended. Using rocks. And again, the not mulch thing, if you're just not prepared to care for it. And the tempered glass we talked about, that's the stack. At that point, I mean, your house is woods ignite. Your home ignition zones, because of the HIZ determines your ignition potential, it's best to start right there, within the HIZ, right? Of course, it's not the same as defensible space. You'll hear people say defensible space. HIZ and defensible space is not the same. The defensible space is assuming the firefighters are going to show up and keep it between your house and the fire. If you've done a good HIZ, then in theory, there will be a defensible space around your home for us to do our job. This is just a little illustration of the HIZ. I can get this and we can post this on the webpage. There's a lot to look at right now, but I think we've kind of hit on most of these different topics. Just little tips that Bob and I picked up in San Antonio. Obviously removing dead foliage and debris from your roof. Move wood piles away, thin your tree canopy. Removing the debris under your porches and patios. Tempered glass. Fire-resistant furniture and padding for your patios. Outbuildings. Open your gates if there's a fire. It's a natural fire break. You know, you can't burn it, it doesn't touch it, right? And then I think last meeting, I had to include this on this slide because I know the last meeting we had about a 10-minute discussion. And this happens. We have overlapping HIZ zones in our community. And that's a big question at the last meeting. Well, my neighbor, he doesn't care, or I live next to a lot that's not developed. Ultimately, it's just going to take cooperation, right? There's nothing we can do. We can't force your neighbor to clean up his yard. We can't force that guy that owns that lot to go over there and remove those dead trees. So it's just going to take a lot of social. This goes back to the 20 of us that are in this room. 20 of us can do a lot of good in this community. We didn't have to have 2,000 people show up this morning to educate what's going on. It's social cooperation is what we're really good at, I think, here in Canyon. So we can do something about it. Our firefighter protection effectiveness will be increased. Your house will be able to stand alone during extreme wildfires if you do this. Life safety options increase for residents and firefighters. If you do have a house that's in a good HIZ zone, you've done the things. We saw slides where firefighters are fighting fires and literally had to run into homes and let the fire pass so they could get back out and do their job. So, I mean, it just provides more life safety options for those if we've done that. And then, of course, we've prevented a community-wide disaster without really any extreme cost to our community, right? This is the homeowner doing the little things that affects our entire community. So, to conclude, I think we're doing good on time at 10 minutes. Your home can survive, right? But we must take action. We have to. And finally, again, fire is is inevitable, but the wildland urban fire disasters are not. So we don't have to accept disasters are going to happen, right? We can accept fire. It's been around forever, but we do not have to accept disasters. I know I flew through that really fast. I think some of it was a little redundant. I'm so thankful for all of y'all. Guys, this is very, very important. Again, I said at the beginning, it's not if, when? Okay?
We're gonna continue our training too. Ron and I've got another one in Austin coming up in a couple, 3-4 months. So we're planning on maybe going to that one. Things are evolving, I guess, as far as the way the protection deal goes and what we do. I mean, we learned a lot, and they learned a lot, you know, just like from the Paradise Fire or other fires in California. We've got all the stats, how many people were killed in going back in fires over the last 30 years.
Staggering.
And it's, you know, thousands of people that have been killed.
It's a shame.
And we've learned how to prevent a lot of those deaths. And a lot of protection of the homes, just like you saw the ones that are still standing that did the right thing, even though the fire was intense around them.
So Bob and I got trained up on how to come to your home, take a look at your home, and give you advice as to what are some of the small steps you can do. Bob and I would love to help anybody that has questions on that. There were some things that were brought up into the meeting. I mean, in our conference, I think one of the things I'm going to mention to the POA and to maybe City Council at the next meeting, I think, you know, we do the yard of the month, and everybody kind of gets fired up about their yard being nice and pretty and green. I'd really like to start incorporating a Firewise House of the Month. Somebody that's, they do a little sign in their yard. It encourages involvement. It lets your neighbors see, oh man, they're really trying, maybe I should too. It's just one of those things I also like to mention at the next meeting. I think, you know, redundancy is the key. Okay, we said that earlier. Mylea said that when she's educating her students and when she's talking, it's just redundancy, right? I think one of the things that would help redundancy in our neighborhood is when I was driving, I went to Red River this summer with my family. We spent a week. It was awesome. But I noticed as I was coming into Red River, I passed, on my descent into town, there were 3 signs that were talking about the fire danger, right? So by the time I pulled into Red River, I was fully aware that we were in a fire area and that even though there wasn't a fire danger at the time, the risk was low. It led me, in my brain, the whole time I was camping, every time I was building a fire, every time we were doing something, to keep it in the back of my mind that there was the risk. So I really think it would be a good idea at the fire station when people come in that we have one of those little fire risk signs. They're not very expensive, they're wooden, they go right in the ground, we can move the meters accordingly. And even if the fire danger is low, it's just going to be that redundancy of folks coming through the gate and realizing, okay, we are in a fire community. Because right now we got a little sign that says Firewise, and yeah, it's cool and all.
And we do have red flags that are up in 3 locations, City Hall, the firehouse, and on the island. When that red flag is up, that just means that there's a conducive to fire.
I didn't know that, Bob. I'm glad you said that. I didn't know we had a red flag, so there you go. We have red flags apparently. But I think also the little sign, the Firewise Houses of the Month, we want to get people involved in this, guys. The 20 of us are not going to go out and save this community by picking up our
and we have done something. The POA's done some things, cleaning up the place, Book Hollow.
Yes. Oh,
so
yeah.
These ongoing projects, if people would just keep on doing that, will gradually improve it. We're not going to ever get good at completely, you know, totally out of the fire danger, but we'll improve it because it just continues to grow. And yes.
Well, on the digital sign up here, we had a bag your trash, we could put in like, clean your gutters. You know, just not.
We could absolutely do some Firewise tips on that.
Yeah.
It's a great
just
suggestion.
reminder.
It's a great suggestion. We could absolutely do that. Again, it's just the redundancy of it.
So,
Sir.
you're talking about putting a sign up that says fire risk today?
Yeah, today's fire risk, got a little,
Okay,
it's got a little Smokey the Bear on it. It's got
Okay.
that little meter.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be really neat, because going into Red River, like I said, I saw 3 of them, and by the time I pulled into my campsite, I was very aware that even though the risk was low, let's keep it that way, right? So,
One more question.
oh, yes, sir.
Blasphemy's getting ready to flow out here, okay? Smokey Bear, 75 years old today, or this week. Most popular campaign publicly to prevent wildfires. But what we've done is take fire away from management. And not all fire's bad.
Right.
No, I don't want your house burned down, and actually, we're in pretty good shape in this canyon, in my opinion. But let your forest managers, your range managers, use fire in their management of our natural resources. Yes, Smokey was good, bringing it up to our attention. Paradise, I've been there, it was a fire trap, but people love to live there. And it's some facts that we have to realize. People are moving out into areas that are going to burn. That one house didn't, they did it right. But let's be careful with what we're doing so that we do release proper management and coordinate with our people that are preventing some of this from happening. I mean,
Yes, sir. That's right.
let's face the facts.
That's right. Well, I'm glad you understand it, guys. That's what's important. Randy?
There are a number of fire schools going on here in the next month or so. Brownfield and Canyon are two locations that are now, this is included in the topics that they talked about. Not just how to fight a structure fire, but the Firewise type of things, what you can do in urban interface, that type of thing. So it's becoming more and more in the classroom, it's being taught, our firemen are becoming more aware of it.
Yeah.
So,
Guys, it's a process. It's a step-by-step. It's not going to happen overnight. Thank you all so much. Remember, go home and share this with your neighbors. Please, talk to your neighbors when you go home. Talk to your friends. And let's just keep pounding it in their heads, okay?
And then tell them to take extra materials with you to hand out to your friends. Get active.
Thank you all.
Thanks for your time.
We're always available.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Remember, Bob,